I grabbed his arm before I knew I was going to, and he looked at me like nobody had stopped him in a very long time. My name is Cassius Hale. I'm 34 years old. I am a storm damage assessment engineer for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, which means that after a severe weather event, I am the person who goes out into the wreckage and tells everyone else what is broken, how badly, in what order it needs fixing, and what can and cannot be touched without killing someone. I carry a clipboard, a thermal camera, a voltage detector, and 9 years of knowing exactly what a utility infrastructure looks like when it has been pushed past what it was designed to endure. I do not carry a lot of room for distraction. The job doesn't allow it. Downed lines don't care if you're paying attention to something else. On a Friday in April, a derecho, a straight-line wind event, not a tornado, though the results are frequently indistinguishable, came through the Mid-South and took out power to roughly 40% of Shelby County. 80-mile-an-hour sustained winds, 17 confirmed line-down incidents in the first 2 hours, and a distribution substation in Midtown Memphis that had taken a direct impact from a downed oak and was showing fault indicators on 3 of its 4 feeder circuits. I was on scene at the Midtown substation at 11:14 p.m. It was still raining. The lineman was already up the pole when I arrived. Not should have been up the pole. Not almost finished up the pole. Up the pole, full extension, 38 feet, working the cross-arm connections in the rain, in the dark, in the aftermath of 80-mile-an-hour winds that had left the surrounding infrastructure in a condition I had not yet fully assessed. I looked at the pole. I looked at my voltage detector. I looked at the fault indicators on the substation panel, which were telling me that the feeder circuit feeding this exact pole segment had not been fully isolated. I grabbed his safety line and pulled. Don't move past this, because what happened in the next 30 seconds is the reason I'm telling you this story at all. He came down fast. Not a fall, a controlled descent, the kind that a person executes when they've been trained for unexpected recalls and their body knows the sequence. He hit the ground, turned, and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as, "Who are you and what do you think you're doing?" "Circuit's not isolated," I said, before he could speak. "Feeder 4 on the Midtown sub is showing a fault flag. If you'd touched that cross-arm connection—" "I checked the isolation ticket," he said. His voice was not angry, controlled, the kind of control that is one layer above angry and is choosing, deliberately, to stay there. Feeder 4 was tagged out at 10:50. "Feeder 4 was partially tagged out," I said. "The downstream disconnect on the Cooper Street segment didn't complete. I'm reading residual voltage on this segment right now." I held up the detector. The indicator was lit. He looked at the detector. He looked at the pole. He looked at me. Something moved through his face. Fast, then slow, the way a wave moves through a structure that's been hit. The initial impact, then the distributed response traveling through everything connected to it. "How long ago did you pull the fault data?" He said. 4 minutes, I said. I drove straight here from the substation. He was quiet for a moment. The rain came down between us. Steady, April cold, the kind of rain that has been falling for hours and has stopped being dramatic about it. He was soaked. Completely. His hard hat had channels of water running off the brim. His jacket was darkened all the way through the outer layer, and his hands, when I looked at them, had the specific redness of someone who has been working in cold rain for a long time without stopping. "Who are you?" he said. "Cassius Hale," I said. "Storm Assessment, MLGW." He looked at me for a long moment, not suspiciously, evaluating. The way a person evaluates information that has just changed their operational picture and they need a second to remap it. "Everett Marsh," he said. "Line crew, District 7. A pause. "You just pulled me off a live segment." "I pulled you off a segment with residual voltage that your isolation ticket didn't account for," I said. "Yes," he said, quiet, direct. "You did. Here's what I need you to understand about Everett Marsh, and I'm asking you to stay with me because this is the part that reframes everything." He didn't argue. He didn't perform gratitude. He didn't do any of the things that people do when they've been caught in a situation that could have gone badly and they need to manage how it looks. He looked at the detector reading for 3 full seconds, and then he pulled out his radio and called his crew supervisor and reported the isolation discrepancy in exactly the technical language that would get the Cooper Street disconnect completed before anyone else went up in this segment. The call took 90 seconds. It was precise, complete, and entirely without defensiveness. When he hung up, he looked at me. "The Cooper Street disconnect will be confirmed in 8 minutes," he said. "Can you stay on site until I have confirmation?" "I'm here for the full assessment," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded. Then he did something I didn't expect. He sat down on the running board of his line truck, leaned his head back against the door frame, and closed his eyes for approximately 5 seconds. Not long. Just 5 seconds of something being set down. When he opened them, I was still looking at him. I was aware that I was still looking at him, and that I had been looking at him continuously since he'd hit the ground, which was unprofessional and which I was not managing to correct. "You drove straight from the substation," he said. "I saw the fault flag and knew which segment it fed," I said. "District 7 had this pole on the active work list." "You knew our work list." "I write the prioritization sequence," I said. "I know every crew's work list tonight." He looked at me. In the mobile floodlight from his truck, his face was clear, tired, rain-soaked, the kind of worn that comes from 6 hours of storm work in deteriorating conditions, but underneath all of that, clear. The kind of face that doesn't have a lot of layers between what's happening and what shows. "How many sites are you running tonight?" he said. 17 confirmed incidents," I said. "I've cleared 9. This is 10. "And you stopped at this one to pull me off a pole." "I stopped at this one because the fault data said someone was going to get hurt," I said. He held my gaze. Something in his expression shifted, slow, traveling inward first and then back out, the way feeling moves through a person who has learned to route it carefully. "Thank you," he said, simply, without qualification. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just don't go back up until Cooper Street confirms." "I won't," he said, and then, after a pause that felt slightly longer than operational, "Sit down. You're standing in the rain." I looked at the running board beside him. I looked at the rain. I sat down. We were side by side on the running board of his line truck, shoulders close, both of us wet, with the mobile floodlight turning the rain into visible silver lines in the air around us. The substation was humming its partial fault hum 60 meters away. Somewhere in Midtown Memphis, the Cooper Street crew was completing a disconnect that should have been completed 40 minutes ago. And I was sitting next to a man I had met approximately 7 minutes ago on a running board in the rain, and I was not thinking about the 8 remaining incident sites on my assessment list. This was unusual. "Are you still here?" "Good. Because this is where it gets harder to explain, and I'm going to try anyway. District 7, I said. You came from the south end of the county?" "Started in Whitehaven at 5 p.m., he said. "Worked north. This is my 4th pole tonight." "4th pole in 6 hours, I said, "in a derecho." "That's the job," he said, without complaint, without performance, just factual, the way a person states a thing that is true and doesn't need decoration. "How long have you been doing this?" I said. 8 years, he said. "Started right out of the apprenticeship program. 22 years old, first storm call-out, Category 1 remnant came through and took out a quarter of Bartlett." He paused. "I was terrified the whole time. I didn't tell anyone." "Did it help?" I said, not telling anyone. He thought about it. Actually considered the question, which not everyone does. "It helped me finish the job," he said. "I don't know if it helped anything else." "What did you do with it after?" "Went home," he said. "Sat in my truck in my driveway for 20 minutes. Then went inside and went to sleep." A pause. "What do you do with it?" I looked at the rain. I thought about the answer honestly instead of automatically. "I write it into the assessment report," I said. "The near misses, the fault discrepancies, the things that almost went wrong. I write them down precisely so that the next person who reads the report knows exactly what to look for." He turned his head to look at me. We were close on the running board, close enough that the turn brought his face into a proximity that I was again professionally aware of and personally not managing well. "You write the near misses into the official report," he said. "Someone should," I said. "Most engineers write around them," he said. "Most engineers aren't the ones who have to go back to the same sites," I said. He looked at me for a long moment in the silver rain. His hard hat was still dripping. The floodlight was catching the water on his jaw, on the line of his cheekbone, in a way that I registered and then registered that I had registered, which was a level of self-awareness I usually reserved for situations that were clearly personal and not situations that were clearly professional, except that this one had stopped being clearly one thing. His radio crackled. "Marsh, Cooper Street disconnect confirmed complete. Feeder 4 is fully isolated." He keyed his radio. "Copy. Thank you." He looked at me. "It's confirmed." "I heard," I said. "I can go back up," he said. "I know," I said. Neither of us moved. "I'm going to tell you something I've never put in an assessment report. In 9 years of storm work, I have been on scene for 41 near-miss incidents. I have documented every one. I know the physics of what happens when a lineman contacts a live segment. I have read the incident reports. I know the outcomes. I have written the recommendations. I know this work costs people. I know it in the technical, documented, reportable way. What I did not know, until that moment, on the running board of Everett Marsh's truck in the April rain in Midtown Memphis, is what it feels like to have arrived 4 minutes earlier than the bad outcome. Not 4 hours, not 4 days, 4 minutes. The specific, nauseating proximity of it. My hands, which are usually entirely steady during assessments, were not entirely steady. He saw it. Of course he saw it. He was right there, close, and he had the kind of attention that notices things. He didn't say anything. He moved his arm slowly until his shoulder was solid against mine. Not a dramatic gesture, not a hold. Just his shoulder against mine, warm through the wet jacket, steady in the way that things are steady when they have held a lot of weight and know how to do it. I looked at his shoulder against mine. I looked at his face. "I'm fine," I said. "I know," he said. "You still went a little pale." "I do that," I said, "when the margin is small." 4 minutes is a small margin," he said. "Yes," I said. "You made it anyway," he said. I looked at him. The rain, the floodlight, the Memphis night doing its post-storm thing, the particular quiet that follows a derecho, when the wind has taken everything it was going to take, and the city is starting the long process of understanding what it's lost. "Everett," I said. "Yeah," he said, his shoulder still against mine. "When you're done tonight," I said, "when your last pole is cleared and your crew is released, I want to buy you coffee or breakfast, whatever time it ends up being." He was quiet for a moment. I was very aware of his shoulder, of the rain. Of the 8 remaining assessment sites on my list that I was not, at this moment, thinking about. "My last poll is going to be around 4 a.m., he said. "I'll be done around 5, I said. "There's an IHOP on Union Avenue, he said. "Open all night." "I know the one," I said. "I'll be there at 5, he said. "If you're late, I'll wait." Something in my chest, the specific place that had been tight since I'd seen the fault flag on feeder 4 and understood what it meant, loosened, slowly, like a disconnect completing. "I won't be late," I said. He looked at me. His shoulder pressed once against mine, brief, certain, the period at the end of a sentence. Then he stood up, checked his isolation confirmation one more time, and went back up the pole. I watched him go, 38 feet, clean and certain, the way he did everything. And then I picked up my clipboard and my detector, and I went back to the assessment, because that was the job, and I had 8 sites left, and the city needed the lights back on. But I drove to every one of those 8 sites with his shoulder still warm against mine in the memory of it, which is not something I typically carry into field assessments and which I did not try to set down. He was already at the IHOP when I got there at 5, 2 a.m., not waiting in his truck. Inside, in a booth by the window, still in his work jacket, with coffee in front of him, and his hands wrapped around the mug and his eyes on the door. When I came through it, something in his face did the thing I'd seen on the running board, that slow, inward-first movement, like weather settling. He didn't wave. He didn't perform recognition. He just looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since I'd pulled him off that pole. Direct, complete, like I was a fault diagram he was reading carefully. I sat down across from him. The coffee arrived. Outside, Union Avenue was gray and wet, and Memphis was doing what Memphis does after a storm. Picking itself up, starting over, matter of fact about the whole thing the way southern cities are matter of fact about the things that keep happening to them. How many sites? He said. 17 cleared, I said. Full county assessment filed at 4:48. You filed it before you came here, he said. The filing window. Doesn't get better if you wait, he said, quietly, with the corner of his mouth moving, giving me my own words back. I looked at him across the table. His hard hat was on the seat beside him, leaving a damp ring on the vinyl. His hands were still red from the cold work. He had a small cut above his left eyebrow, equipment contact, nothing serious, that he hadn't bothered to address, and the floodlight in the IHOP parking lot was coming through the window and hitting the left side of his face with the specific warm gold of a sodium lamp, and I thought about 4 minutes and 38 feet and a voltage detector lit up in the rain. Everett, I said. Yeah. I want to say something, and I want to say it before the coffee and the pancakes and the debrief, because if I wait, I'll write it into an assessment report instead. He put his mug down, gave me his full attention, which was a lot, complete, like a circuit closing. I've been on 17 incident sites tonight, I said. I have driven past burning transformers and flooded substations and a distribution panel that was actively arcing when I arrived. And the only site that made my hands unsteady was yours. I paused. That's not in the report. He held my gaze. The IHOP was warm around us. Early morning quiet, a few other post-storm crews at other tables, the ordinary comfort of a place that stays open through everything. His face was tired and certain and open in the way it had been since he'd looked at my voltage detector and understood what it meant. Cassius, he said, my first name. He said it like he'd been holding it for the right moment. Yeah. I've been up 38 feet in the rain more times than I can count, he said. I've been in conditions that were worse than tonight. I've never come down a pole and found someone waiting at the bottom who came specifically because they were worried about me. He paused. That's not in my incident log either. The space between us on the table was not large. His hands were around his mug. Mine were near his, close enough that the move, when it came, was not a reach so much as an arrival. I moved my hand forward. He unfolded one of his from the mug and met mine on the table. Palm to palm, warm from the coffee and the long night, fingers closing with the quiet certainty of a line being restored. You okay? He said. I keep being, I said. The slow smile. From the eyes outward, traveling at its own pace, arriving warm and full and completely real. Me too, he said. Outside, Memphis was coming back online, circuit by circuit, block by block, the grid reassembling itself in the gray April morning. Somewhere in Midtown, the Cooper Street disconnect was holding. Feeder 4 was isolated. The lights were coming back on. And in a booth on Union Avenue, 2 people who had spent all night holding things together were finally holding something else. New story tomorrow, same time. Subscribe. You don't want to miss it.